welcome Cheryl Fish-Parcham at Families USA, who will be talking about what a Texas court just ruled that could affect whether you can access preventative care through your health insurance and what happens next. So, welcome, Cheryl.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So, tell us about this Texas court case, which you may have heard of as Braidwood. Who brought it, and what's going on?
It was brought by Braidwood Management Company and 6 individuals. These are individuals in Texas who objected especially to the fact that PrEP is a covered preventive service in all health plans that are compliant with the Affordable Care Act. But they took issue with preventive services generally. So this is about whether health plans have to cover preventive services for free and what services they have to cover for you. Right now, you can get a number of services that have been recommended by the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force as being useful to help you avoid getting a number of serious illnesses. And those are free of cost sharing, and this case calls that into question.
So, by preventative services, you mean things like mammograms and other types of scans and your free annual checkup, that kind of thing?
That's absolutely right. Anything that this task force has recommended since 2010 is in question in this case. So this includes lung cancer screening for 50 to 80-year-olds with smoking history, statins to reduce cholesterol, PrEP for people with high risk of HIV infection, colorectal screening, perinatal depression, anxiety in children screening for hepatitis B, screening for liver cancer, screening for cervical cancer, for hepatitis C, and aspirin to help prevent premature deaths, prediabetes, and diabetes screening. So very important services that are being called into question right now.
And so, where does the case stand now that the judge made a ruling?
So Judge O'Connor in Texas made a ruling that these services don't need to be covered. The case is now on appeal at the Fifth Circuit, and the Department of Justice has filed an appeal there. A number of patient groups have also filed amicus briefs saying that they also don't want this ruling to go forward.
What are some of those groups that have come out against this?
American Lung Association, American Heart, Adult Vaccine Access Coalition, Cystic Fibrosis and Epilepsy, groups that represent people with leukemia, with MS, with AIDS, the National Minority Quality Forum. So a number of patient groups, and we expect that more will do so also. Besides the patient groups, the American Public Health Association has objected to the case, and a number of law school deans and scholars have also objected to the case.
So, how many people does this affect? How many people get free preventative services thanks to these requirements?
Well, there are about 152 million people who are enrolled in private coverage that are subject to these requirements, and over 100 million people end up actually using the preventive services benefit in a year.
So that means that even if somebody has private insurance, they do not have insurance through the Affordable Care Act, this affects them too?
Well, a lot of private insurance is through the Affordable Care Act. So it's not just the healthcare marketplaces, it's also private insurance that you might get through your employer. So there are some plans that existed long before the Affordable Care Act that have a grandfathered status that might not have to comply with this, but almost most plans will have to comply, do have to comply right now with the preventive services mandate, and so that is called into question.
So, since these things are in jeopardy, will doctors continue to recommend these services, or will people stop getting these key preventative tests if they're going to have to pay extra for it?
Well, we're very afraid that people will stop getting these tests if they have to pay for it. It's the place where the case stands now is that the government has asked for a stay in the ruling, and we're waiting for a ruling as to whether that stay is going to be granted. So we don't know exactly what will happen while this case is being litigated at this point. A number of plans are on a calendar year. So, it wouldn't be until the next time that they're renewed that the cost sharing might be charged. Some plans can make the change with a 60-day advance notice. Some plans are not on a calendar year. So at different times in the year, people could face this problem where the plan decides that now they're not going to provide all of the preventive care for free or certain of the preventive care for free.
And how quickly might employers and insurance companies drop coverage of these services if the ruling doesn't get stayed or reversed?
Mostly they would have to provide 60-day advance notice. If if your plan year is changing, things could happen quickly.
Is this already happening, or are people, are insurers and employers waiting to see how the courts go?
Well, so in Texas specifically, these particular companies, Braidwood Management, Kelly Orthodontics, and 6 Texas Individuals, said that they had a religious objection to covering PrEP, the services to prevent the spread of HIV. The court in Texas said, okay, you don't have to cover these services. And for the moment, at least, no one is saying that those folks particularly have to cover those services. So though that part has stood for those particular individuals, as far as whether there's a nationwide impact, that's what is in active litigation right now.
So this case is mostly about requirements for private insurers to cover preventative services. Could this ruling, what's happening in the courts, have any effects on Medicaid or Medicare?
Yes, Medicaid expansion programs also have to cover the services that are recommended by the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force. And in Medicare, the Secretary of HHS determines what could be covered. While this case isn't directly taking aim at the Medicaid program, by inference, they're taking aim at whether the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force has authority to decide what care people should get, and so a future lawsuit could have an impact on Medicaid. Similarly, with Medicare, the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force decides what cost sharing should be eliminated, and there could be repercussions on that down the line, not immediately. The case doesn't immediately get at either of those two programs.
Hmm. And can you talk a little bit more about timeline? So this one judge in Texas has ruled, and it's been appealed to the Fifth Circuit. What happens next, and how long does it take?
Well, right now people are filing amicus briefs at the Fifth Circuit, and that could go through June 12th. And then what happens next sort of depends on whether there's a stay or not at that level. There might be a stay, and then litigation would proceed to decide what happens. It could go to the Supreme Court. I expect some rulings in the spring, but I think the case itself could go on for a much longer time than that. So it's really important that people start talking about it and say how much this matters and that they care about their preventive services. Public opinion is sometimes as important as the legal matters themselves.
Hmm. And so, if the appeals court could be working on this for months, it might not even hit the Supreme Court until next year. So it would continue to be in limbo and not really know what's happening.
That could very well be, yes.
So it all really depends on whether there is a stay or whether there are immediate effects of this ruling.
That's right. That's right.
So the people listening and watching with us right now, is there anything they can do about it? What should we be doing right now?
Well, public opinion really is important. There are a couple things that people can do. One is that they could file a MICA brief at the courts. They could join with patient groups that are doing this. They could talk to lawyers about whether they might be good people to be involved in the litigation. Short of that, people could also explain how preventive services matter to them. They uplifting stories in the media as well as to political officials is a really important thing that we all have the power to do. My organization, Families USA, can help lift up stories. If you have a story to tell about why preventive care matters to you, feel free to email us. We'd be glad to talk with you. But also, everybody can be talking to newspapers about the importance of preventive care.
And so, how do people get a hold of you in Families USA if they care about making sure that we can all access preventative services?
My email address is cparcham@familiesusa.org. You feel free to email me. Also, you can go online at familiesusa.org, and there's a place, Tell Us Your Story, that you'll find on our website.
How can people keep track of what's happening next, since this may be stuck in the courts for many months? How can they find out what just happened or what's going to happen?
Well, we'd be glad to talk with you as you try to figure this out. Georgetown University has a wonderful litigation tracker that provides updates on the status of this case.
Okay, so they should go to that Georgetown website to find out more and see what's happening.
That's right.
Well, thank you very much for sharing this important court case, because I think millions of Americans are not aware that their access to basic preventative services could be under attack. So, as Cheryl said, it's important to share your story, spread the news, make sure that people know about this, because it's been kind of under the radar. There have been some other big court cases involving healthcare this past year that people have been talking about. And this is one that people haven't been talking about as much, but it affects millions, as you said, over 100 million Americans potentially.
That's right. Thank you for talking about this issue. It's so important that people take action and hear about it.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Please call or text in your questions at 202 838 6837, and we'll answer them in future episodes. And join us next week. This is Care Talk.